Hello everyone and welcome back to the Sherlock Holmes. Now I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, also like, and subscribe if you are enjoying the case. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. Story 1 on the evening of April 26, 2005 in Durham, North Carolina. Janet Aboa, a pregnant mother, was found dead in her home with her 6-year-old Caden sleeping in the next room. The investigation revealed a tangled web of deceit, infidelity, and financial struggles. As police delved into the case, they uncovered troubling inconsistencies in her husband Raven's story, accusations of embezzlement, and a suspicious life insurance policy added layers to a complex narrative. What really happened on that fateful night? Janet was born on June 19, 1979 in Virginia, as the 7th of 10 children in a devout Mormon family. She was intelligent and athletic, so she distinguished herself from an early age. She excelled in sports like soccer, basketball, and swimming. Her hard work in academics and athletics put her on the first women's soccer team at South Virginia University in 1988. During her time at the university, Janet met Raven Aboa. He was a player on the men's soccer team, and press presented himself as a charismatic suitor who shared her religious beliefs. Their relationship developed rapidly, and they became inseparable by August 2000. At just 20 years old, Janet married Raven in a ceremony that adhered to their religious traditions. After their marriage, the couple moved to Durham, North Carolina for job opportunities with Eurosport. Initially, they appeared to be a perfect couple. However, signs of trouble began to emerge as financial strains and infidelity issues soar in their relationship. The marriage between Janet and Raven Aboa began to deteriorate in 2003 when Raven confessed to multiple affairs. This admission included a relationship with a minor, which not only shattered Janet's trust, but also introduced significant strains into their already fragile relationship. Following this revelation, Raven temporarily moved out, leaving Janet to confront the emotional turmoil alone. The couple's issues were compounded when Janet discovered she was pregnant with their second child. In 2005, this unexpected news created a profound dilemma for her. She was torn between her commitment to her marriage and the reality of Raven's infidelity. In December 2004, Raven Aboa was arrested for shoplifting at the sporting goods stores where both he and Janet were employed. During the investigation, it was revealed that he had been engaged in a scheme to embezzle goods worth over $99,000 from the store. Raven operated his embezzlement scheme methodically. He ordered athletic shoes and arranged for their delivery to their home address. After receiving the merchandise, he sold the shoes online under the alias Footballer Guy. This approach allowed him to profit from stolen goods while maintaining an appearance of legitimacy. The embezzlement came to light when the supplier contacted the sporting goods store regarding unpaid merchandise, a verification of delivery address. Quickly led investigators to Raven, resulting in his prompt dismissal from the store and subsequent legal action. Although Janet was not involved in the theft, she faced significant shame and humiliation due to her husband's actions, leading her to leave her job as well. Raven managed to avoid prison time for his embezzlement. Instead, he was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay restitution of nearly $10,000. The financial strain from Raven's embezzlement and subsequent legal troubles added immense pressure on the young family, who were already struggling to make ends meet. They had received support from their landlord and Church community, but Raven's actions exacerbated their dire financial situation as tensions escalated. Raven took out a life insurance policy on Janet worth $500,000, which raised suspicions about his intentions. This decision seemed particularly questionable, given their precarious financial situation and the fact that he had not previously held such policies. Janet increasingly expressed concerns about Raven's aggressive behavior towards her friends, fearing his unpredictable outbursts of anger. These factors, infidelity, financial instability, and escalating tensions, set the stage for the tragedy that was about to unfold. The combination of personal and financial crises created an environment ripe for conflict, ultimately leading to the catastrophic events of April 26, 2005. On April 26, 2005, The day began like any other for Janet Aboa. She picked up her 6-month-old son, Caden, from daycare and returned home. The couple had plans to meet with a member of their church community later that evening. As the day progressed, tensions within the household were palpable, stemming from ongoing marital issues. Around 8:30 p.m., Raven Aboa prepared to leave for a soccer match in Morrisville. In an unusual move, he locked their 2 dogs in the shed before departing. This behavior was out of character, as the dogs typically slept indoors and provided Janet with a sense of security when questioned. Later, this action raised suspicions among investigators. Raven claimed that when he left the house, Janet was getting ready for bed. However, around 10 p.m., he returned home to find her dead on the floor in an unnatural position. Initially, he reported to the 911 dispatcher that she had suffered a gunshot wound. However, it was later determined that she had been stabbed multiple times when investigators arrived at the Aboa residence on April 26, 2005. They found Janet Aboa in a kneeling position on the floor of their bedroom. The scene was grim, with evidence indicating that she had been brutally attacked. An autopsy later confirmed that Janet had suffered multiple stab wounds. Specifically, she had 3 deep stab wounds on her left arm, which was identified as a defensive wound, and 2 fatal stab wounds to her chest and neck. The fatal stab wounds severed an artery and penetrated her lung, leading to her death. The coroner also confirmed that Janet was pregnant at the time of her murder, a fact known only to a few of her closest friends. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry at the crime scene, and valuables remained untouched. Only Raven's laptop and several kitchen knives were missing from the house. Janet's wedding ring and other jewelry were found untouched on her vanity, suggesting that the victim likely knew her as Salant or willingly let them into her home. Crucial evidence collected at the crime scene included a bloody shoe print and a fingerprint that did not match Raven's. These findings raised significant questions about Raven claims and the circumstances surrounding Janet's death. Raven Aboa's frantic call reporting that his wife Janet was not breathing came under scrutiny almost immediately. During the call, he initially claimed that she had suffered gunshot wounds when emergency responders arrived at the Aboa residence. They found Janet dead from multiple stab wounds, directly contradicting Raven's assertion of a shooting. This discrepancy raised immediate suspicions among investigators regarding the accuracy of Raven's claims. The inconsistencies did not end there initially. Raven was cooperative with investigators. However, as the investigation progressed, he informed Janet's family that she had committed suicide. This claim was met with skepticism by her family, who knew Janet's character and strong religious beliefs against taking her own life. Raven provided conflicting statements to law enforcement too. He initially stated that he found Janet already dead, but later claimed she was alive and had asked him why it hurt so much. Yet during his call with the 911 dispatcher, he did not ask for help for Janet, but rather informed them that she had been shot. These inconsistencies in his narrative further fueled suspicion about his involvement in Janet's murder. Shortly after Janet's death, Raven moved to Utah with their son, Caden. His decision to leave North Carolina raised eyebrows among investigators. Furthermore, he attempted to claim the life insurance payout for Janet even before her funeral, which added to the growing concerns regarding his motives. During the investigation, investigators discovered that Raven had backed up all data from his laptop to CDs just one day before the murder on the 25th of April, 2005. This timing was particularly suspicious and raised questions about his intentions leading up to Janet's death while sorting through belongings. Following the murder, Janet's sister found these disks containing vital information backed up just before the incident. The discovery of this evidence suggested potential premeditation on Raven's part and contributed to the mounting case against him. In 2008, Raven married Vanessa Pond, a single mother whose daughter attended the same daycare as his son Caden. Initially, Vanessa was hesitant about entering a relationship with Raven, but he persistently pursued her. Charming her with his attention and care for her child, he presented himself as a devoted father and partner, which helped him gain Vanessa's trust. However, troubling patterns soon emerged that mirrored those seen in his first marriage to Janet. Reports indicated that Raven exhibited abusive behaviors similar to those he had displayed during his marriage to Janet. Allegations of controlling behavior and emotional manipulation surfaced, raising alarms among those close to Vanessa. Friends and family members noted that Vanessa began to withdraw from her support network and became increasingly isolated as Raven exerted control over her life. Ultimately, Vanessa's marriage to Raven ended due to these allegations of abuse. This cycle of behavior highlighted a disturbing pattern that seemed to follow Raven into his new relationship, suggesting unresolved issues from his past and an inability to maintain healthy partnerships in the months following Janet Aboa's murder. The investigation faced significant challenges. Despite the initial suspicions surrounding her husband, Raven Aboa, there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Investigators found a bloody shoe print and a fingerprint at the crime scene, but neither matched Raven's. This lack of concrete evidence hindered the prosecution's ability to build a strong case against him. Additionally, Raven's alibi for the night of the murder was confirmed by multiple witnesses who saw him at a soccer match in Morrisville. While this alibi initially appeared to exonerate him, it also complicated the investigation as detectives struggled to reconcile his presence at the game with the timeline of Janet's death. As time passed and leads dwindled, the case went cold until Detective Charles Soule took over in late 2009, so was determined to re-examine all aspects of the investigation with fresh eyes. He meticulously reviewed the evidence collected during the initial inquiry and began focusing on inconsistencies in Raven's statements and behavior. Detective Soule also began questioning whether Janet had been wearing her contact lenses at the time of her death. He theorized that if she was prepared for bed but still had her contacts in, it would contradict Raven's narrative that she was murdered. Shortly after he left for soccer practice to investigate this theory further, Soule decided that exhuming Janet's body might provide crucial evidence. The exhumation was necessary to determine if she had been indeed wearing her contact lenses when she died, which provided a clear timeline of events leading up to her murder. In early 2010, Janet's body was exhumed from a cemetery in 2010. Pennsylvania. During the examination, investigators confirmed that she had died with her contact lenses still in her eyes. This finding suggested that she had not been preparing for bed as Raven claimed, but rather was likely attacked shortly after he left for the soccer match. The results of this exhumation were significant. They not only contradicted Raven's timeline, but also indicated potential premeditation on his part. The presence of her contact lenses suggests that Janet was caught off guard, raising further questions about Raven's involvement in her murder as Detective Soule pieced together these elements. Raven's inconsistent statements, his suspicious behavior after Janet's death, and now the evidence from the exhumation, all signs pointed towards his culpability. The inconsistencies in Raven's narrative became increasingly difficult to ignore, with mounting evidence suggesting foul play and a growing belief that Raven had orchestrated his wife's murder. Authorities prepared to take decisive action. The stage was set for an arrest that would finally bring justice for Janet Aboa on February 1st. 2010, Raven Aboa was arrested in Idaho on charges of first-degree murder in connection with the death of his wife, Janet Aboa. This arrest followed a lengthy investigation that revealed inconsistencies in his statements and suspicious behavior. Surrounding the circumstances of Janet's murder, the investigation raised significant doubts about Raven's credibility and involvement in the crime, ultimately leading law enforcement to take decisive action against him. In April 2013, the highly anticipated trial of Raven Aboa commenced, lasting for 5 weeks. The trial attracted significant media attention due to the nature of the crime and the complexity surrounding the case. The prosecution presented a robust case built primarily on circumstantial evidence. They called over 80 witnesses to testify, including friends and family members, who provided insights into Raven's violent behavior and manipulative tendencies. Key testimonies included accounts from women who had experienced Raven abusive behavior firsthand. These witnesses described instances of emotional manipulation and aggression, painting a picture of a man capable of committing such a heinous act. One notable witness was Janet's close friend, who testified about Janet's fears regarding Raven's unpredictable outbursts and her concerns for her safety. This testimony aimed to establish a motive rooted in Raven's abusive behavior and the deteriorating state of their marriage. The prosecution also highlighted critical evidence from the crime scene indicating the absence of forced entry, which suggested that Janet likely knew her assailant. They argued that Raven's actions following Janet's murder, such as moving to Utah with their son Caden and attempting to claim a life insurance payout, were indicative of guilt. In contrast, the defense focused on the lack of direct evidence linking Raven to the murder. They argued that the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and emotional testimonies rather than concrete proof. The defense highlighted that there were no fingerprints or shoe prints matching Raven found at the crime scene, undermining the prosecution's claims. Additionally, they emphasized Raven's confirmed alibi. Multiple witnesses corroborated his presence at a soccer match during the time of Janet's murder. This alibi was crucial for the defense, as it suggested that he could not have been at home when the crime occurred. The defense also pointed out inconsistencies in witness testimonies and questioned the reliability of those who claimed to have seen or heard anything suspicious on the night of the murder. By focusing on these gaps and evidence, they aimed to create reasonable doubt to the minds of the jurors. By May 2013, after 5 long weeks of testimony and deliberation, the trial concluded with a hung jury. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, with 11 jurors voting guilty while 1 maintained innocence. This deadlock resulted in a mistrial, leaving both sides frustrated and uncertain about what would happen next. The outcome highlighted the complexities of the case. Despite compelling circumstantial evidence presented by the prosecution, the lack of direct evidence linked Raven to Janet's murder ultimately prevented a conviction. The mistrial also pointed towards deeply divided opinions regarding Raven's guilt or innocence, setting the stage for further legal proceedings in what would become a protracted battle for justice. As discussions about a potential retrial began, both sides braced for what lay ahead, knowing that this was far from over. The trial had raised more questions than answers, leaving Janet's family seeking closure and justice for their loved ones. Tragic deathfall following the mistrial in 2013. Discussions about a potential plea deal began between the prosecution and defense, as both sides sought to evaluate new evidence that had emerged during the investigation. One of the key pieces of evidence that the prosecution felt might sway the jury in the retrial was the report of Janet Aboa's body exhumation conducted in July 2010. Among all the inconsistencies Raven had put forward, the biggest one was related to Janet's contact lenses. His claim that Janet was getting ready to go to bed was proven wrong by the exhumation report, when it was confirmed that there were still fragments of contact lenses in her eyes. So, as per Detective Soul's theory, if she had not removed the lenses, she was not yet ready for bed. And if she was not ready for bed, it meant she was attacked and killed shortly after Raven left for his soccer match. Hence, the whole scenario would fall onto Raven that maybe it was Raven who pretended to go out for a football match and locked up the dog so there wouldn't be any protection for Janet. He then came back inside the house, and since Janet knew it was him, there were no signs of forced entry or call for help, which she would have done in the case of an intruder. He then committed the murder and left for the football match, which confirmed his alibi. Upon his return, he would make a 911 call where he described his wife as dead, but later changed his stance and said that she was alive upon his arrival. Although all of this was speculative evidence based on theory, and there was no match found of the bloody footprint or the fingerprint of the crime scene, it was looking likely that if another trial were to take place, the jury would be swayed towards declaring him guilty of first-degree murder. On March 12, 2014, Raven Aboa entered an Alford plea for voluntary manslaughter in connection with the death of his wife, Janet. Aboa, this plea allowed him to acknowledge that sufficient evidence existed for a conviction without admitting guilt. The decision to accept this plea deal came after extensive discussions between the prosecution and defense. Following the mistrial in 2013, the terms of the Alford police stipulated that Raven would plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, which is a lesser charge than first-degree murder. This charge typically indicates that while the defendant did not intend to kill, there was a significant degree of recklessness or negligence involved in their actions that led to someone's death. By accepting this plea, Raven effectively acknowledged that the evidence against him was strong enough to likely result in a conviction. If the case went to trial again, the acceptance of the Alford plea was influenced by several factors. After the mistrial, both sides recognized the challenge of pursuing another trial. The prosecution needed to ensure a conviction without risking another hung jury, while the defense sought to mitigate potential sentencing outcomes for Raven as part of the plea agreement. Raven was sentenced to 8 to 10 years in prison but received credit. For time served, approximately 4 years, meaning he would serve a reduced sentence. The sentencing reflected the sheer seriousness of Janet's death, while also considering Raven's acceptance of responsibility through the plea. Accepting the voluntary manslaughter charge allowed Raven to avoid a more severe sentence associated with first-degree murder, which carries harsher penalties and reflects premeditated intent by pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter. He could maintain this innocence publicly while acknowledging that his actions contributed to Janet's death. This strategic move likely aimed to reduce public scrutiny and provide some measure of closure for both families. Involved, ultimately, this plea agreement marked a pivotal moment. In the case, closing one chapter while leaving lingering questions about justice for Janet Aboa and the implications of domestic violence within relationships. The acceptance of the Alford plea demonstrated how legal strategies can shape outcomes in high-stakes criminal cases, particularly when direct evidence is lacking, but circumstantial evidence is compelling enough to influence decisions made by both prosecutors and defendants. On Christmas Day, December 25th of 2017, Raven Aboa was released from prison after serving time for his Alford plea of voluntary manslaughter in connection with the death of his wife, Janet Aboa. Upon his release, he moved back to Utah, where he sought to rebuild his life following the tumultuous events surrounding Janet's murder in the wake of Janet's tragic death, and the subsequent legal proceedings. Her family remained deeply affected by the outcomes of the case. They felt that justice had not been adequately served for Janet's murder and continued to advocate for victims of domestic violence. Janet Aboa's story has since been utilized as an example in training law enforcement. Regarding domestic violence investigations, her case serves as a critical reminder of the complexities involved in such situations and the importance of thorough investigations when dealing with potential domestic abuse cases. Law enforcement agencies have incorporated lessons learned from Janet's tragic experience into their training programs to better equip officers in recognizing signs of domestic violence and responding appropriately through these efforts. Janet's legacy continues to impact lives beyond her own, highlighting the urgent need for awareness and advocacy in the fight against domestic violence. Her family's commitment to this case underscores their belief that no one should endure what Janet experienced, and they strive to ensure that her story contributes positively to future generations. Whether Raven Aboa was directly involved or not, the investigations could not prove that yet. Many out there believe that his behavior towards Janet before the incidents, the infidelity, the relationship with a minor, the abuse, and unpredictable outbursts of anger were enough to prove his guilt. His inconsistencies and claims he put forward to law enforcement, his actions after her death, the fact that he ran away to Utah, tried to present the entire case as a suicide, and his attempt to withdraw Janet's life insurance money even before the funeral could not have all been coincidences. Furthermore, the fact that the same abuse and unpredictable patterns of anger repeated in his second marriage also raised severe concerns about whether the LW system made the right call by allowing him to go into a plea agreement and giving him a lenient charge regardless of it all. Raven is living his life as a free man, largely on the back of no direct evidence being found against him. Do you think he was the main culprit in his wife's brutal murder, and was the decision to find him not guilty the right one from a jury, considering a plethora of circumstantial evidence and testimonies against him? Story 2 on June 28, 2015. Dr. Teresa Sievers returned home from a family vacation, unaware that her life was about to be brutally cut short. The horrific murder of an appreciated holistic physician on site in her residence sent ripples of shock into Bonita Springs, Florida, and otherwise tight-knit community detectives would later uncover a most remarkable conspiracy involving her husband Mark Sears and 2 other associates who perpetrated from more than 1,200 miles away. What could make a husband kill his wife in such a violent way? We explore the harrowing case of Dr. Teresa Sievers, a story that reveals how love can turn into treachery and how greed can lead to unimaginable violence. How did a devoted mother and a successful doctor become the target of a murder plot? What dark secrets were hidden behind closed doors? Let's take a look. Dr. Teresa Grace was a holistic physician known for her commitment to patient care. She graduated from Ross University School of Medicine in 1996 and established a medical practice in Bonita Springs, Florida. Teresa was dedicated to blending traditional and alternative medicine, helping patients who had exhausted other treatment options. Mark Douglas Severs, Teresa's husband, served as the office manager at her practice. They married in 2003 and had 2 daughters initially. Portrayed as a supportive family man, Mark's actions would later come under scrutiny as the investigation into Teresa's murder unfolded. Financial struggles within the family would emerge as a significant factor in the events that followed. The conspiracy to murder Dr. Teresa Sievers began during the wedding of Curtis Wayne Wright in May 2015. Mark Sievers, attending as a guest, confided in Wright about his mental health issues and expressed fears that Teresa would take their children away. Mark articulated his desire to have Teresa killed, citing financial motivations tied to her life insurance policies. He believed that eliminating her would solve his problems and provide him with the financial security he sought initially. Uncertain about the plan, Wright eventually agreed to assist Mark, indicating that he could handle the situation for a share of the insurance payout. After securing Wright's agreement, Curtis Wayne recruited Jimmy Roy Rogers to assist in the murder plot. Wright promised Rogers a portion of the life insurance money as compensation for his involvement in his trial testimony. Wright characterized Rogers as someone with a history of violence, stating that he had been involved in other deaths. This portrayal highlights Rogers' willingness to commit murder, making him a suitable accomplice for the planned attack on Teresa. Mark Severs devised 2 potential scenarios for executing the murder. The first scenario involved killing Teresa at their home on June 28th, making it appear as though a burglary had occurred to prepare for this option. Mark tested access points to their property, including going over the backyard fence and trimming bushes to create a clear path to the garage. He also instructed Wright on how to enter the house and disable the security system. The second scenario considered by Mark involved murdering Teresa at her medical office on June 29th, aiming to disguise it as a mugging. He provided Wright with aerial photographs of the building, identifying a secluded stairwell that Teresa often used when leaving work late at night. Mark even shared access codes for the well, with Wright emphasizing that regardless of where the murder took place, it should appear to be an act of robbery or burglary. On June 28, 2015, Dr. Teresa Sievers returned to her home in Bonita Springs, Florida after cutting short a family vacation in upstate New York. She arrived at Southwest Florida International Airport, where security footage captured her rolling her suitcase through the terminal after calling her husband Mark to inform him that she was safe. Teresa got into a car and drove home. Unbeknownst to her, 2 men were waiting inside the house, ready to execute a deadly plan orchestrated by her own husband, Mark, the same person who she had just informed about her safety inside the house. Curtis Wayne Wright and Jimmy Roy Rogers lay in wait. They had meticulously planned this moment after weeks of discussion and preparation. As Teresa stepped into the kitchen, Wright ambushed her from behind. He had picked up a hammer from the garage freezer earlier and struck Teresa once in the head. Startled by the sudden attack, she turned to confront her assailant but was met with another blow. The violence escalated rapidly as Rogers joined in, wielding his own hammer. The 2 men attacked Teresa with brutal force, striking her repeatedly until she fell to the floor in a pool of blood. Witnesses later described how Teresa fought back instinctively, raising her hands to protect herself from the blows. Despite her efforts, she succumbed to the overwhelming assault, sustaining a total of 17 impact wounds to her head before silence fell in the kitchen once they were certain Teresa was dead. Wright and Rogers left the crime scene without activating the alarm system. They had previously disabled it. Using the knowledge provided by Mark Sievers during their planning discussions, the murder had been executed swiftly and without any immediate evidence of forced entry. They used an unlocked side door to gain access after committing the crime. Wright and Rogers returned to Missouri in their rental car. They believed they had successfully covered their tracks. Meanwhile, Mark Severs received alarming news from Dr. Severs' office early on June 29th. She had not shown up for work, appearing concerned about his wife's absence. He called a family friend to check in on Teresa at home. This call would lead to the discovery of Teresa's body and set off an investigation that would unravel a complex conspiracy on the morning of June 29, 2015. Teresa Sievers was discovered dead in her kitchen by a family friend after Teresa failed to show up for work. Mark Sievers called Dr. Mark Petrius, a family friend, asking him to check on her upon entering the home. Using the garage code provided by Mark, Dr. Petrus found Teresa face down in a pool of blood with a hammer lying next to her body. She was cold to the touch, and there were clear signs of a violent struggle. The brutal murder of Dr. Sievers sent shockwaves through the Bonita Springs community. A well-respected physician and mother, her death left many in disbelief. Friends and patients expressed horror at the violence inflicted upon someone who had dedicated her life to helping others, marking a tragic loss for the community after Teresa Sievers was found dead. On June 29, 2015, law enforcement began their investigation. Detectives interviewed family members, friends, and colleagues to gather information about Teresa's life and any potential threats she may have faced. Investigators sought tips from the community, emphasizing the need for information that could lead to identifying the perpetrator. They explored vigorous angles, including Teresa's professional relationships and personal life. Early in the investigation, attention turned to individuals who had interacted with Teresa or had grievances against her. However, no immediate leads emerged. Nearly 2 months after the murder, a significant breakthrough occurred when law enforcement received a tip from a source in Missouri. The tip indicated that Curtis Wayne Wright had confessed to someone about his involvement in Teresa's murder. Following the tip, detectives focused on Wright and his accomplice Jimmy Roy Rogers. They traveled to Missouri to investigate further and gather evidence linking them to the crime. In August 2015, both Wright and Rogers were arrested in Missouri for their roles in Teresa's murder. The arrests were surprising to many as they were not local suspects. Their arrests followed a thorough investigation that uncovered critical evidence linking the two men to the crime police. Executed search warrants at their residences where they collected various items that connected them to the murder, including clothing and other materials purchased shortly before Teresa's death. The investigation had gained momentum after detectives received a tip that led them to Write. This information prompted a closer examination of his relationship with Mark Sievers, which raised suspicions about their potential involvement in a murder-for-hire scheme. The evidence collected during the arrest would later play a significant role in the trials of both men. Initially, Curtis Wade W. denied any involvement in Teresa's murder during police interrogations. However, as investigators presented evidence against him, he eventually crumbled and ended up confessing to his role in the crime. In his testimony, Wright detailed how Mark Sievers had approached him with the idea of killing Teresa during his wedding in May 2015, citing marital problems and financial motives. Wright admitted that he'd agreed to take care of it for at least $100,000 from Teresa's life insurance policy. He also implicated Jimmy Roy Rogers as his accomplice, describing how they planned and executed the murder together. This confession was pivotal in establishing Mark Sievers' involvement in orchestrating the murder plot, as Wright provided critical details about their communications and planning efforts. Leading up to the crime in February 2016, he agreed to a plea deal with prosecutors to avoid facing a potential capital murder charge. Under the terms of the plea agreement, Wright confessed to his role in the murder and agreed to test I-5 against his co-defendants, Mark Sievers and Jimmy Roy Rogers. In exchange for his cooperation, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder. This plea deal required that he provide substantial assistance to the prosecution throughout their cases against Sievers. Rogers Wright's confession detailed how he and Rogers traveled from Missouri to Florida with the intent to kill Teresa as part of a plot orchestrated by Mark Sievers. He explained that Mark had approached them with the idea during his wedding in May 2015, citing financial difficulties and a desire to eliminate Teresa as a solution. The testimony was pivotal in establishing Mark's direct involvement in planning the murder. The outcomes of Wright's plea deal were significant. It not only secured a conviction against him, but also provided critical evidence that would lead to the eventual arrest and conviction of Mark Sears-Wright's willingness to cooperate with law enforcement marked a turning point in the investigation as his insights into the conspiracy illuminated the events leading up to Teresa's tragic death in December 2015 after an extensive investigation into the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. Law enforcement arrested her husband, Mark. Sievers' detectives had been meticulously gathering evidence that linked Mark to the conspiracy to kill Teresa, which culminated in his arrest. The investigation revealed a series of text messages exchanged between Mark and Curtis Wainwright, which indicated a clear conspiracy to murder Teresa for financial gain. These messages outlined discussions about the murder plot and demonstrated Mark's direct involvement in orchestrating the crime. Prosecutors alleged that Mark had hired Wright and Jimmy Ray Rogers to carry out the killing, motivated by financial pressures and fears of losing custody of their daughters. Additionally, court documents released during this time highlighted troubling aspects of Mark and Teresa's marriage, including financial difficulties and potential infidelity. The evidence suggested that Mark stood to gain significant from Teresa's life policies, which totaled over $4 million across 5 separate policies. On December 4, 2015, shortly after Teresa's funeral, Mark was taken into custody. He was escorted by law enforcement from the Lee County Sheriff's Office, wearing a red jumpsuit with bonds set at $4.4 million, as investigators pieced together the timeline of events leading up to Teresa's murder. They expressed confidence that they had enough evidence to charge him with first-agreement murder. Mark Sievers' arrest marked a significant turning point in the case as it shifted focus onto him as a central figure in the conspiracy. His initial cooperation with investigators began to wane as the evidence against him mounted, leading to a complex legal battle that would unfold in the months to come. Following Mark Sievers' arrest in December 2015, investigators intensified their efforts to gather additional evidence related to the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. A critical aspect of this ongoing investigation involved the analysis of digital evidence, particularly GPS data from the rental car used by Curtis Wainwright and Jimmy Ray Rogers. During their trip from Missouri to Florida, investigators obtained the GPS data, which provided a detailed account of the route taken by Wright and Rogers. This information was crucial in establishing a timeline of their movements leading up to the murder. The data confirmed that they departed Missouri on June 27, 2015, and arrived in Bonita Springs early on June 28. Just hours before Teresa was killed, the precise timestamps indicated that they had arrived at the Sievers home around 6 a.m., aligning with the timeline of events surrounding Teresa's murder. In addition to the GPS data, investigators also analyzed cell phone records that revealed communications between Mark Sears and Wright. These records indicated a pattern of contact leading up to the murder, further solidifying the connection between Mark and the conspiracy. The use of prepaid phone by Mark and Wright suggested an attempt to evade detection, but investigators were able to trace their communications effectively. The collection of this digital evidence played a significant role in cooperating witness testimonies and establishing a clear narrative of how the murder was planned and executed. As investigators continued to piece together the evidence, it became increasingly apparent that Mark Sears had orchestrated the crime, leveraging his relationship with Wright and Rogers to carry out his intentions. This phase of evidence collection not only reinforced existing findings, but also laid the groundwork for subsequent legal proceedings against Mark Sears, ultimately shaping the trajectory of the case as it moved toward trial. As preparations for the trial began, prosecutors focused on compiling a comprehensive body of evidence against both Curtis Wainwright and Mark Sears. A significant piece of evidence came from surveillance footage captured at a local Walmart where Wright and Jimmy Ray Rogers were seen purchasing items that would later be linked to the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. The footage showed the two men shopping with apparent disregard for concealing their identities as they bought trash bags, flushable wet wipes, black towels, and a lockpicking kit. These purchases were critical in establishing their intent to commit murder and dispose of evidence afterward. In addition to the surveillance footage, investigators collected fibers from a blue jumpsuit discarded by Rogers along Highway 47 in Missouri. Forensic analysis revealed that these fibers matched those found on Teresa's clothing at the crime scene, providing a direct link between Rogers and the murder. This physical evidence bolstered the prosecution's case by demonstrating that both men had been present during the crime. The prosecution also gathered digital evidence, including GPS data found from the rental car used by Wright and Rogers. This data confirmed their route from Missouri to Florida and established a timeline of their movements leading up to Teresa's murder. The combination of digital footprints, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence created a robust case against the defendants. As the trial dates approached, the prosecution prepared to present this evidence in court, aiming to establish not only the guilt of Wright and Rogers, but also to demonstrate Mark Sievers' orchestrating role in planning his wife's murder. The evidence collected would be pivotal in shaping the narrative presented during these trials following the conviction of Jimmy Ray Rogers. Mark Sears stood trial in December 2019. The prosecution once again prepared a case that relied heavily on the testimony of Curtis Wayne Wright, who had accepted a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation. Wright detailed how Mark orchestrated the murder plot, providing critical insights into the lad to Teresa's death. During the trial, prosecutors presented various pieces of evidence linking Mark to the crime. This included text messages exchanged between Mark and Wright that indicated discussions about the murder and financial motivations behind it. The prosecution argued that Mark's desire for financial gain from Teresa's life insurance policies was a primary motive for orchestrating her murder. The defense countered by asserting that there was no credible evidence directly connecting Mark to the actual murder. They emphasized that the state had only proven that Wright and Rogers, not Mark, were responsible for Teresa's death. The defense focused on discrediting Wright's testimony by highlighting his criminal background, which included multiple felony convictions and a history of mental health issues, including bipolar disorder. They argued that Wright had a motive to fabricate his story in order to secure a more lenient sentence for himself. Additionally, the defense theorized that Wright might have been influenced by law enforcement during his interrogation, suggesting he was simply parting a narrative fed to him by investigators. They pointed out that Wright had not undergone a polygraph examination, which they argued could have validated or undermined his credibility as a witness. The defense concluded their arguments by urging jurors to question whether they could trust Wright's statements and to consider the lack of direct evidence linking Mark to the crime. As the trial progressed, jurors were presented with the same forensic evidence, including fibers from a blue jumpsuit that Rogers had discarded that matched those found on Teresa's body. Despite this evidence, the defense maintained its position that Mark Sever was not involved in planning or executing the murder on December 4, 2019. After a brief deliberation of approximately 4 hours, the jury found Mark Sever guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The verdict was based on overwhelming evidence that linked him to both the planning and execution of Teresa's murder. The jury's decision reflected their assessment of the evidence presented during the trial, including the motive and financial gains from Teresa's life insurance policy. The prosecution effectively demonstrated that Mark had not only planned the murder, but had also recruited Wright and Rogers to carry out his intentions. Following the verdict, Mark Sever faced a sentencing phase where jurors would determine his punishment. The outcome of this phase would depend on whether they found aggravated factors that warranted a death sentence, or if mitigating circumstances could lead to a lesser penalty. Following his conviction for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, a sentencing phase for Mark Sever took place where jurors considered aggravating factors related to the crime. This phase began on December 11, 2019. Shortly after the verdict was delivered, the prosecution sought to establish two primary aggravating factors: that the murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner, and that it was carried out for a pecuniary gain. The state presented evidence from the trial, including Curtis Wayne Wright's testimony about Mark's orchestration of the murder and the financial motivations behind it. Additionally, victim impact statements were introduced to convey the emotional toll of Teresa's murder on her family and community. The defense aimed to present mitigating evidence, highlighting Mark's lack of prior criminal record and his relationships with his daughters. Family members testified about his role as a father and husband, portraying him in a positive light. However, they faced a challenge in countering the strong evidence presented by the prosecution. On January 3, 2020, after deliberation, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for Mark Sever. They found that the aggravating factor of cold calculated premeditation was proven beyond a reasonable doubt, but did not find sufficient evidence to support the pecuniary gain factor. During the sentencing hearing, Mark Sever addressed the court, maintaining his innocence and expressing his love for Teresa and their daughters. He requested that he be spared from the death penalty despite his pleas and the defense's arguments for leniency. Judge Bruce Kyle ultimately sentenced him to death for orchestrating this murder. The court emphasized the weight of the jury's recommendation and noted that Sever's actions demonstrated a complete disregard for human life. In addition to the death sentence for first-degree murder, he received a consecutive 30-year prison sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, the sentencing phase. Concluded with Mark Sever facing significant legal challenges ahead, as he planned to appeal both his conviction and sentence. As of now, Mark Sever remains on death row at Union Correctional Institution in Florida, while appealing his conviction and sentence following his sentencing on January 3, 2020. Sever has maintained his innocence, asserting that he did not orchestrate his wife Teresa's murder. His legal team claims to have new evidence that could potentially clear his name. This includes a letter from Jimmy Ray Rogers, the third man involved in the murder plot, in which he allegedly states that Sever was innocent and had no part in the crime. Sever attorney had filed motions to overturn his sentence, arguing that this new evidence could have influenced the jury's decision during both the conviction and penalty phases of the trial. However, the state of Florida has expressed confidence in its case, asserting that the evidence presented at trial was strong enough to uphold Sever's conviction. Legal experts remain skeptical about whether this new evidence will be sufficient to warrant a retrial. Given the substantial evidence linking him to the crime, the Florida Supreme Court is expected to rule on S's appeal in the coming months. Do you think a letter from Rogers is enough to prove Mark's innocence? Story 3 on January 13, 2020. Officials from law enforcement agencies went to Anthony Todd's home in Celebration, Florida to issue him a warrant related to fraud charges. But they were all shocked to discover for badly decomposing human bodies as well as the body of a dog. The bodies found in Anthony Todd's house were not strangers, but rather his own family, including his wife Megan and 3 children. And the killer wasn't any armed robber or hitman, but Anthony Todd himself. Anthony Todd was born on the 29th of September 1975 in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. He did not have a normal childhood like other kids in his school and social circle, and was surrounded by dysfunction. Growing up, his father, Robert Todd, was a high school teacher who had a disturbing taste for girls a lot younger than him. Anthony's mother, Loretta Todd, was a housewife who had no idea that her husband was having secret affairs and sexual relationships with 16 and 17-year-old girls from his class. The problem was more serious than it looked. Robert was engaged to a nurse at the same time and had a relationship with one of his students, and this all was happening while he was married to Loretta. After hiding his affairs and relationships, Robert decided to permanently remove his wife from the equation and marry his fiancée at this point. Anthony Todd was just 4 years old. One night, he woke up to the sound of his mother screaming from her bedroom shortly after that. Anthony Tony Todd heard a gunshot when he went to his mother's room. She was lying on the floor, miraculously still alive, although Loretta had been shot in the eye from point-blank range. She survived the murder attempt as the investigation began. It was soon discovered that Robert Todd, Anthony's father, wasn't as devastated as a normal husband would be after such a shocking incident. Rather, he seemed irritated and disappointed at the fact that his wife had survived. The law enforcement authorities soon knew that Robert had something to do with the murder attempt on his wife. This was proven right when further investigation into the matter revealed the shocking truth that Robert Todd had offered to pay one of his mentally disturbed students $900 in exchange for a special assignment killing his wife Loretta. Robert wanted the murder to look like a case of home invasion. He gave the student a key to his house, a pistol, and instructions about where to find the bedroom where his wife would be sleeping. The incident took a serious mental toll on Tony, and he found it hard to recover from it all. After getting a divorce from her husband, Loretta remarried and tried her best to help her son get out of the trauma. But Tony's mental health was permanently damaged ever since he had heard about his biological father trying to kill his mother. Despite his mental health issues, Anthony Todd was an extremely well-mannered and hard-working kid in school. It was because of this that he was voted to be the president of his class in both his junior and senior years. It was during high school that Tony met Megan for the first time. With time, Tony and Megan grew close and even decided to pursue similar degrees after graduating from high school. Just a few months after graduating from college, Tony and Megan decided to tie the knot. Soon after marrying each other, the couple moved from Pennsylvania to Connecticut and set up their own physical therapy business. There they both practiced physiotherapy and worked together to grow their business until after a couple of years, Megan found out that she was pregnant with the couple's first child. This forced Megan to stop working as a physiotherapist, and the couple welcomed their first child, Alec, after a couple of more pregnancies and some unfortunate miscarriages. The Todd family comprised Anthony, Megan, and their 3 children, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe. It was a perfect American family, and Tony was the best father and husband anyone could have asked for. He was faithful to Megan and committed to providing for his children. Not only this, he made sure he was there for his kids on important occasions like school events and sports practices. Megan, who had now become a housewife full-time, was equally dedicated to her children. The Todds were a well-respected family in the community. A part of this was because of Anthony's physical therapy business, which had grown significantly over time. When the money started coming in abundance, the couple decided to buy a condo in Celebration, Florida, a master-planned community located near Walt Disney World Resort. It was the perfect place for the Todd family to move because the place promised happiness, peace, and more importantly, safety. But they soon moved to a house nearby when the condo started feeling small for their family. The Todds were living a happy family life, going on day-long trips to Disney World, visiting the beach, playing games, attending piano recital, and participating in different sports. Since Tony's business was based in Connecticut, he would return to work on his own while Megan and the kids stayed behind. Until this point, it was a picture-perfect life for the Todd family until 2011. When everything changed, when Megan was a teenager, she was bitten by a tick which developed into Lyme disease, which is a bacterial infection. LME disease normally stays dormant for years and doesn't cause any health issues until something triggers it and ignites its symptoms. That's what happened in the case of Megan in 2011 after a trip to Disney World. Megan told her husband that she had been bitten by a bug. Initially, the couple thought that the infection would go away after a few days, as in most of such cases. However, it could quickly turn into serious health problems. Megan was soon diagnosed with tonsillitis, hepatitis, and several other diseases. These health problems affected Megan mentally as well, and her personality completely changed with time. Sometime after her health issues began, Megan was diagnosed with depression, which only worsened when she had another miscarriage since Tony was in Connecticut to run the business the whole week and could only be in Celebration on weekends. It made things extremely hard for Megan to make things worse. She didn't have the kind of community support the family had enjoyed while they were in Connecticut. The only positive in the whole situation was Tony's physiotherapy business, which Megan thought was going really well, except it wasn't at all. The company hadn't been making a profit for some time, and Anthony Todd was the main reason behind that. He had been using the company funds to buy condos across the country and intended to rent them out to vacationers, but those properties didn't make the desired profit, and most of them were running at loss. The little money that the physiotherapist business now made wasn't enough to run 2 houses in different states and cover Megan's medical bills and Tony's airfares as the financial problems increased. Anthony Todd decided to take out a small loan to make meet, but couldn't pay off the repayment when the time came, so he took another loan to repay the first loan, and the cycle continued. Things quickly worsened before they knew it. Tony was under $100,000 of personal debt. He also owed money in terms of company debts and 2 mortgages for the family's houses in Connecticut and Florida. Until this point, Anthony had been hiding the financial problems from Megan, but thought it was now time to tell his wife exactly what was going on, and he decided to keep it that way to make things worse. He thought it was a good idea to repay their debts by committing fraud. Anthony started sending invoices to different health insurance companies and the Medicaid program for physiotherapy treatments that he had never delivered to his clients when the money came in. Anthony repaid the smaller of nearly 20 different loans, amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. After some time, the insurance company started to grow suspicious and the FBI began an investigation into the matter. In 2019, when the FBI agents interviewed Tony's patients, they complained that their insurance companies were billing them for 5 sessions a week when in reality they had seen their physiotherapist once or twice a week. In some cases, the patients had moved out of the state and hadn't seen Tony in months. These discoveries prompted the FBI investigators to secretly check the documentation of the 2 clinics Tony had been operating, and they immediately noticed discrepancies. There were invoices for therapy sessions on days when the clinics weren't even open on the day of the surveillance. Tony billed insurance companies for the therapy sessions of 16 different patients. Despite the fact that the clinic remained closed that day, the authorities decided to bring Anthony Todd in for questioning. He initially denied knowledge of any wrongdoing, but direct testimonies from several of his patients left nothing for him to convince investigators of his version of events. He eventually admitted to fraud, but insisted that his wife didn't know anything about his fraudulent activities. He also agreed to plead guilty to any future charges. If Megan was left out of it, in September 2019, Tony was stripped of his physiotherapy license and both of his clinics were suddenly closed without any prior notice to his employees. Despite his admission, Anthony wasn't under arrest yet. In November 2019, he told the investigators that he was going to visit his family in Florida and would be back in Connecticut in the first week of December. He was allowed to travel to Celebration but never returned to Connecticut. When Christmas came, Anthony's sisters informed the police in Celebration that she hadn't heard from the family in weeks, which was quite unusual because they regularly kept in contact. She told the authorities that she was particularly worried about her brother because she knew he was involved in a fraud investigation. She also said that during the call with her brother, Anthony told her that Megan and the kids had gotten ill and hadn't gotten out of bed in a few days since Tony never called. After that, it made her wonder if the illness was more serious than what her brother had told her. On December 29, 2019, police officers knocked on the Todd's home to do a welfare check. No one answered the bell, and there were no signs of anyone occupying the house either. The Sheriff's Department in Celebration noted its report that the family had probably gone back to Connecticut. It took 2 more weeks to find out that the entire Todd family had been inside their Celebration home the whole time. On January 13, 2020, investigators from the Department of Health and Human Services and police officers from the Ecola Sheriff's Department visited the Todd family's house. They knocked on the front door for 3 days but didn't receive any response from the inside. There was also an eviction notice posted on the front of the house, which convinced the authorities that the Todd family was still in Connecticut. Meanwhile, Tony's sisters told the local authorities that the family had been receiving disturbing messages from Tony and Megan's numbers. This was around the same time when the FBI agent who was investigating Anthony Todd's fraud case followed him to Celebration. This was because he had failed to report back ever since leaving Connecticut to spend Thanksgiving with his family in Florida. An FBI agent was parked outside the family's house in Celebration when noticed Anthony stepping out of the house and briefly sitting on the patio before going back inside. The agent immediately informed the local sheriff's department, and officers arrived at the house within minutes to arrest Anthony Todd. But the police also had the responsibility to check on the welfare of Megan and the kids because of the official request by the couple's families. When the officers asked Tony about Megan and the kids, he told them that Megan was sleeping and that the kids were at a sleepover, but the officers knew they had to search the house because of an unusual smell. When the officers entered the master bedroom, the smell became overwhelming and was identifiable. It was the smell of a rotting human body. The law enforcement officials were shocked to see the decomposing body of 42-year-old Megan and their 2 children. Alec and Tyler, the family dog, was also lying dead in the room. As for the 4-year-old Zoe, she was nowhere to be found. It was clear that the bodies had been there for several weeks. What was even more disturbing was that Tony had been sleeping beside his dead wife the whole time when the forensic experts started removing the bodies. They discovered that Zoe was also in the room. Her remains were so badly decomposed that they had melted with those of her mother. Anthony was immediately arrested and interrogated about what had happened at his house. Meanwhile, the victim's autopsy report revealed that all of the victims except Zoe had been stabbed in the abdomen. The medical examiners also wrote in the report that they were murdered around Christmas in late December 2019. Anthony initially denied having any knowledge of his wife and kids' deaths, but later he told the authorities that Megan had made a death pact with him because of their shared fear of an imminent apocalypse. He also said that Megan supported him when he went into each of his children's bedrooms to murder them. He suffocated Zoe while stabbing Alec and Tyler. According to Anthony, Megan then stabbed herself in the stomach and took her own life. Anthony Todd was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, and prosecutors indicated that they would be seeking the death penalty for the heinous crime he had committed. The authorities had both the murderer and his confession, but sometime before the trial began, Tony changed his story. For this, he sent a 26-page letter to his father and shared a new version of exactly what happened in their celebration home. The new perpetrator in Tony's revised vision of the events was none other than his deceased wife, Megan. In the letter, he wrote that he was completely innocent of all the charges against him, and his wife was the one unresponsible for the death of their children. She gave them Badril, separated them, and then stabbed them one by one. He also said in the letter that on the night of the incident, he had taken the family van to their nearby condo to do some repairs and collected a necklace for his daughter. He further added that he even played basketball with the boys on the driveway before leaving while Megan was baking a pie for the kids. He said he never returned to the house that night and decided to sleep in the van because the oils Megan used to help with her symptoms irritated his son's minds. When he woke up the next morning, the van wouldn't start, so he had to walk back to the house, according to Anthony Todd. When he went back to the house the next morning, he found the half-eaten blueberry pie on the kitchen counter, which smelled strange. He wrote in the letter that Megan told him that she had a vision of the end of the world and had killed her children after that. Megan stabbed and killed herself, despite him begging her not to hurt herself. Tony portrayed himself as a helpless bystander throughout the letter and even wrote that he tried to contact law enforcement authorities as well, but there wasn't any working phone in the house. He said he put all the bodies in the master bedroom and covered them with blankets to comfort them. He also shared several other versions of the incident with his sister. While in jail awaiting his trial, during one call, he told his sister that he didn't remember anything about the murders of his family at all when it was time to enter his plea. Anthony Todd pleaded not guilty to the charges of 4 murders when the trial began. The prosecutors told the court that Tony didn't kill his family because of an apocalypse or because he wanted to free their souls, but rather he murdered them because his fraudulent financial activities were about to be brought to light. Tony's family also provided insights into his mental health issues. According to his sister, the family was close to the community in Connecticut, but things completely changed when they moved to Celebration, Florida in 2000. Those 2 years, Tony had put on a lot of weight and was diagnosed with diabetes. She told the court that he also started keeping his work and financial details secret from others. When the time for Tony's testimony came, he pretended to be a grieving husband who was devastated by the loss of his wife and 3 children when he was asked to talk about Megan's medical history. He was tearful at times, but seemed irritated. Whenever he objected in the middle of his answer, he told the court that Megan was diagnosed with Lyme disease during her teen years. He further added that before he met Megan, she was diagnosed with a heart issue as well. He also shared how Megan developed a drug-induced hepatitis. Throughout his testimony, he maintained that he was completely innocent and his wife Megan was responsible for the murder of their children. He also told the jury Megan had become heavily influenced by a religious group when the medications failed to help her with her symptoms. According to Tony, his wife met this group online and soon developed a strong belief that the afterlife was better because she would be free of all diseases and physical ailments. He said that Megan regularly attended the meetings of the religious group through Skype, and he sometimes sat with her too. According to him, Megan was given different prayers to pray to help her with all the problems she was facing in life. He shared that Megan had started believing in a phenomenon called family lineage, Kara burning. She had faith that each afterlife was connected to the previous lives, and burning the family karma in the current life would help her family reach a salvation in which they would be reincarnated to a better life. Tony said the purpose of Megan's connection with the religious group was better health and better relationships with people who had abused her and verbally or otherwise affected her life when it came to telling the jury how the murders happened. Anthony Todd shared the same version he had written in the letter to his father, but he also blended it with the story he told his sister. He said he wasn't in the house when the murders happened and didn't recall giving any recorded confession to the authorities. He said when he entered the house the next morning, Megan brought him into the room and told him that she had murdered their kids. He also added that he was so shocked by all of what had happened that he fell down the stairs, smacked his head on the stairs, and fractured his neck. He told the jury he didn't remember what happened next until he woke up in jail. When asked about the recorded confession, he said he had no knowledge of it and saw the video for the first time in the court. But in his recorded confession, he had told the investigators that he and Megan had collectively made the plan to kill their children, and the kids were also well aware of their imminent deaths because Megan and him had gotten their consent before murdering them. Although surprisingly, he denied responsibility for murdering the family dog. In the recorded confession, he also answered the question about when he had killed his family. 2 days before Christmas of 2019, he told the jury when he saw his wife and children dead, he wanted to take his life and be with them. For that, he cut his wrists and took multiple doses of Badgeril, and at several points even tried hanging himself. He further added to his version by saying that his wife had all the phones in the house, so he yelled from the window to get help. When no one arrived to help him, he visited a local store to buy a gun and tried taking his own life. In his recorded confession, he also told the investigators about the suicide note he and Megan had written together. According to the note, they as a family had decided to end their lives. For several reasons, they wrote that they were seeing the end of the world prophecy coming true and chose to not suffer and be subjected to foreseeing tortures, cataclysmic demise, and continued agony. The note also referenced that through death, Megan would be free of pain because the ultimate goal was to be together without pain and suffering. When it came to discussing his wife's death, Anthony Todd told the court that she had stabbed herself twice in the stomach after consuming a large amount of Badgeril. But according to the autopsy report, the downward angle of the stab would strongly indicate that someone else was responsible for killing her. In 2022, the jury unanimously found Anthony Todd guilty of 4 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 4 lives in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in an unusual move, added 1 year to Anthony's sentence for animal cruelty charges, stemming from him having killed the family dog Story 4. Amanda and James Coley lived in a charming neighborhood on South Boggio Drive, a cul-de-sac in St. Augustine, Florida. The couple had a son and daughter, and to the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect family living the American dream. Those who knew Amanda described her as confident in the life of the party. She was always surrounded by friends and had a vibrant personality. James, too, was personable and easy to befriend. He was involved in coaching his children's sports teams, and everyone thought he was a great dad. However, as time passed, cracks started to appear in their marriage. James had always had a jealous side, and Amanda's outgoing nature and the way she lit up every room she walked into made him insecure. Her ability to make friends and attract attention further fueled his insecurities. Matters worsened when James began to drink heavily. His jealous tendencies became even more difficult to control when he was under the influence of alcohol. It became a common occurrence for James to verbally abuse Amanda. Blaming her for the problems in their marriage, Amanda believed it was important for their children to have their mother and father in their lives, so she and James tried to make their strained relationship work. Despite Amanda's best efforts, James' jealous behavior did not subside. It continued to manifest in various ways, including constantly monitoring Amanda's movements, controlling her social interactions, and questioning her fidelity. She attempted to navigate these challenging waters for the sake of their children, but her efforts were met with increasing aggression and intimidation from James. The toxic environment created by James' behavior had a profound impact on Amanda's son and daughter. They witnessed their parents' drug struggles, and the emotional turmoil began to affect their well-being. This constant tension and fear became unbearable for Amanda and her children, and she realized that something had to change. After careful consideration, Amanda made the decision to end her marriage with James. She knew that staying in the relationship was no longer a viable option, not only for herself, but also for the well-being of her children. The decision to leave was not easy, but Amanda was convinced it was the best choice for her and her children. When Amanda informed James of her decision, he was devastated. He did not want to lose her. However, Amanda's decision was final, and she was determined to create a safe and nurturing environment for her son and daughter. James moved out of the home he and Amanda once shared on South Baguio Drive, but he visited the home often. There were times when James was over at the house that he and Amanda engaged in relations, but Amanda alleged that she only did so to comply with James, to keep him from getting upset and hurting her. Amanda started dating a man, Lamar Doley, but kept it a secret from James. Despite their separation, James, jealous tendencies did not subside while Amanda was away. One weekend, James decided to act upon his jealousy. He broke into Amanda's home and carried out a disturbing act of violence. James gathered all of Amanda's clothing and burned them in the backyard. After that incident, Amanda officially filed for divorce and sought an injunction from the court. This injunction included a provision that stated James needed to stay away from her home. In her injunction, Amanda explicitly stated that if James found out she had a boyfriend, he would kill her. She knew first the lengths James would go in order to control her, and she had seen firsthand the consequences of his jealous rages. Feeling threatened by Amanda's independence, James took drastic measures to spy on her. James sought the help of his neighbors living on South Baguio Drive. He asked them to keep an eye on Amanda's activities and inform him if they noticed any suspicious activity, particularly men around her house. In August 2015, Mike Dickens, one of James' neighbors, sent him a text message containing a screenshot of a shirtless man mowing Amanda's lawn. This text sent James into a furious rage. He immediately confronted Amanda, demanding to know the identity of the man in the photograph. Amanda assured James that the man was merely someone she had hired to cut the grass. However, James was not convinced and continued to harass Amanda through text messages. James turned to Mike Dickens, who had provided him the initial image for support in his message. To Mike, James referred to Amanda as an evil person, a cheater, and the worst person on the planet. He expressed his anger, stating she will pay for her perceived infidelity. On August 27th at 4:41 a.m., James drove to Amanda's house on South Bellagio Drive. Amanda, however, was not home. Frustrated by her absence, James decided to enter her house. Once inside DI, he embarked on a destructive rampage, breaking every television and destroying the furniture and walls. As James made his way through Amanda's bedroom, he stumbled upon a collection of men's clothing and adult toys. These items did not belong to him, and he immediately became enraged. In a fit of anger, he began incessantly calling Amanda, informing her about the intimate items he had discovered inside her bedroom. At 8:34 a.m., James left a voicemail on Amanda's phone, calling her disgusting. His message was filled with anger and accusations, further escalating the situation. Just half an hour after leaving the voicemail, James arrived at St. Johns County Courthouse for an appearance on the injunction violation that Amanda filed against him for an earlier incident during the court hearing. For the injunction violation, James pleaded no contest to violating the terms of their protective order. Unaware of the mess James had just made at Amanda's house, the judge took into consideration James' lack of criminal history and decided to impose an alternate sentence rather than send him to jail. The judge ordered James to attend anger management classes and placed him on 1-year unsupervised probation. James, dressed in his work clothes, appeared to accept this decision and leave the courthouse. However, his plans took a turn for the worse. Before leaving the courthouse, James called Amanda and left another voice message. This time he pleaded with her to listen to him and call him back. James referred to Amanda as baby and expressed his desire for reconciliation. Amanda finally answered the phone, and they engaged in a 14-minute conversation. The exact content of this conversation remains unknown, but it significantly impacted James' actions. Instead of heading to work as planned, James changed his actions. He headed to a gas station there. He filled up his tank and purchased several cans of beer. At approximately 10 to 11 a.m., James started his journey towards South Bellagio Drive, where Amanda lived, armed with 2 loaded handguns. Amanda returned home to a devastating scene. James had not only damaged her home, but also caused her immense emotional distress, alarmed and upset. Amanda sought solace in the arms of her boyfriend Lamar and was joined by two friends, Lindy Robbins and Rachel Hendrick. Visibly shaken and in tears, Amanda reached out to the sheriff's department and requested assistance. However, after careful consideration, she decided against pressing charges against James. Amanda wanted to avoid seeing James go to jail and be separated from their children, since Amanda denied the officers' help. They left Amanda's home unbeknownst to Amanda. James had already made his way to the vicinity of her home. He parked his vehicle outside the residence and stealthily approached the front door. Amanda, Lamar, Lindy, and Rachel were gathered in the living room kitchen area. Without hesitation, James opened fire on the house, screaming, "Where is he?" Recognizing the danger, Lamar reacted quickly and escaped security camera footage from the south. Bellagio Drive residents captured Lamar's desperate dash to a nearby house. In the chaos that ensued, Amanda, Lindy, and Rachel found themselves caught in the crosshairs of James' rage. Bullets pierced through the walls, sending shockwaves of fear through the room as the smoke cleared. The sound of silence engulfed the home. The three women sought refuge in Amanda's bedroom and hid inside the master suite. While hiding, Amanda courageously decided to call 911. However, things took a deadly turn when James could be heard outside the bathroom door, demanding Amanda open it. Amanda desperately pleaded for James to stop, knowing he was looking for her boyfriend Lamar. She knew that revealing Lamar's location could put him in grave danger. Unfortunately, the situation escalated further, and the 911 dispatcher heard a barrage of gunshots and screaming. The dispatcher's worst nightmare was quickly realized as Amanda's cries for help abruptly ended. James had violently entered the bathroom and opened fire on Amanda, killing her after shooting Amanda. James turned his attention to the closet where Lindy and Rachel were hiding. Lindy was also on the phone with 911 and kneeling in the back of the closet. Rachel, standing in the corner, prepared herself for the worst. James shot the closet door down in a moment of pure instinct. Rachel took advantage of the situation and snuck behind the door as James walked in, her heart pounding. Rachel heard Lindy cry out in "Oh my God!" as James raised his firearm and pointed it directly at her head. In an instant, James pulled the trigger and Lindy's life came to an end. Rachel ran out of Amanda's home and sought refuge at a neighbor's house there. She hid in a closet and called 911, expressing her fear that James would eventually find her. Officers arrived at the scene and swiftly launched an investigation, trying to piece together the sequence of events that led to Amanda's death. However, there proved challenging as James had already fled the scene hours after committing the heinous crime. James reached out to his father, confessing that he could not handle the situation any longer. He revealed that Amanda had been relentlessly trying to put him in jail, leaving him no choice but to take drastic measures. James expressed remorse and claimed he tried his best to resolve the situation peacefully. James drove to his sister's house where he picked up some of his belongings before leaving and heading north. The hunt for James only lasted for a single day. Before he was apprehended in Virginia, his arrest came as a result of a call from a woman who reported a suspicious car with Florida tags driving aggressively and attempting to run her off the road, traveling with 3 small children. This woman was terrified for her safety. In response, an officer made a traffic stop and James was arrested. He was found to be intoxicated but did not resist at the police station in Virginia. James was taken into an interrogation room where Samantha English, a detective from Florida, was there to question him about Amanda and Lindy's murders, despite driving 10 hours to interview James. Detective Samantha English's efforts proved futile after he insisted on seeking an attorney because the nature of Amanda and Lindy's death was so horrifying. The prosecution considered seeking the death penalty against James Coley. To secure a conviction in the death penalty, the prosecution had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that James had committed premeditated murder and that he had several opportunities to change his mind. Premeditation refers to the perpetrator's intent to kill before carrying out the act. In this case, the prosecution had to demonstrate that James had planned to kill Amanda and Lindy prior to the murder. The prosecutor had to present evidence showcasing that James had formulated a plan to kill Amanda and Lindy, that he had intentionally carried out the killings, and that he had knowingly disregarded any opportunities to change his mind. They needed to gather sufficient evidence and build a strong case against James to ensure justice was served for the two victims. James, who was being held at the Duffield Regional Jail awaiting trial for the murder of Amanda, maintained contact with his family throughout his incarceration. These phone calls were recorded, providing detectives with valuable insights into his mindset. Through these recordings, the true nature of James's cold-hearted nature was exposed in various phone calls. James expressed his intention to keep his son and daughter away from Amanda's family. James made it evident that he aimed to assert control over his children's lives. Moreover, the recordings revealed James's confidence in securing a manslaughter conviction. He spoke about the possibility of being released from prison in less than 20 years. Even though he was facing charges for murder, an inmate at the Duffield Regional Jail came forward to speak to the prosecution. The inmate Andrew Cherry claimed that he had conversations with James in which James expressed that Amanda and Lindy had gotten what they deserved when he shot them. According to Andrew, James had no shortage of mean and spiteful things to say about his dead wife. James blamed Amanda for the failure of their marriage and expressed satisfaction in ending her life. The inmate's testimony provided the prosecution with a crucial insight into the motive behind James's actions. It suggested that the motive for murder was not merely an act of violence, but a deep-rooted desire for revenge. James had harbored resentment towards Amanda and sought to punish her for perceived wrongs. During the summer of 2018, James Coley found himself on trial. James made a shocking admission to the court. On the first day of the trial, he informed the judge that he understood the strategy devised by the defense was to save his life. However, he also stated that by accepting this defense, he would be admitting to discharging a firearm that resulted in the deaths of two people. James's defense team presented their case to the jury during their opening arguments. They emphasized that this case was not about assigning blame, but rather about understanding the why and the how. Behind the tragic events, the defense argued that a man like James, who professed to love his family above all else, could not have done this. According to the defense, James was under the influence of Ambient at the time of the shooting and urged the jury to consider this mitigating factor. According to James's defense attorneys, this incident was not a case of first-degree murder. The attorneys argued that there was an element of diminished responsibility due to James's state of intoxication. They maintained that James was not in his right mind at the time of the shooting and lost control of his actions. Rachel Hendrick, who had witnessed James's rampage firsthand, was the first to testify. She recounted the horrifying events that unfolded on the evening of the murder. Lamar Doyle, Amanda's boyfriend, was the second witness to testify. He said he became convinced that James was targeting him, prompting him to run from Amanda's house as soon as he heard gunshots. During Lamar's cross-examination, the defense attorney sought to cast doubt on his testimony. The attorney asked if Lamar was aware that James and Amanda had been engaging in a secret relationship. Lamar denied having any knowledge of this. However, the defense's questioning took a controversial turn when the attorney mentioned Amanda's adult toys. The prosecution was outraged, feeling that the defense was attempting to tarnish Amanda's reputation and paint her as promiscuous. The public sentiment mirrored the prosecution's view as people took to social media and attacked the defensive attorney for victim-blaming Amanda. In a later interview, the defense attorney claimed that his intention was not to victim-shame Amanda, but to save his client's life. He argued that exploring all aspects of the case, including the intimate details of Amanda's life, was necessary to understand the situation comprehensively. However, the public remained divided, questioning the defense attorney's tactics and motives. After the prosecution presented their case in court, it was time for the defense to present their side of the story. One key decision for the defense team was whether James would testify in his defense. The defense had to consider the potential risks and benefits of James taking the witness stand. On one hand, the defense believed James could gain jury sympathies by expressing his side of the story. James could humanize himself and appeal to the jury's emotions by explaining his actions and emotions. However, on the other hand, the defense knew that James would face a grueling cross-examination by the prosecution. This cross-examination would expose any inconsistencies in his testimony and could raise further questions about his guilt. Ultimately, the defense decided not to put James on the witness stand. This decision was not made lightly, as the defense knew that it would deprive the defense of the opportunity to present their case firsthand. However, the defense believed that the risks of James testifying outweighed the potential rewards instead of calling James a witness. The defense decided to call Rhonda, James's sister. Rhonda's testimony played a significant role in the defense's strategy. The defense aimed to show that while James was trying to salvage his marriage, Amanda was already seeking a divorce during her testimony. Rhonda became emotional as she spoke about her role in her brother's divorce. She acknowledged acting as a go-it for James and Amanda, attempting to mediate and find a resolution to their marital problems. During the defense's closing arguments, they argued that an emotional roller coaster led to the deaths of Amanda Coley and Linda Dobbins. They contended that it was not a premeditated crime and urged the jury to find James Coley guilty of second-degree murder. The defense alleged that James snapped and committed the murders in a state of temporary insanity. However, the prosecution presented a different theory. During their closing arguments, they argued that James committed to a deep-seated resentment and anger that built up over time. According to the prosecution, James killed Amanda and Linda because Amanda rejected him and his inability to accept no. For an answer, Amanda and Linda's loved ones attended every day of James's trial, wearing purple, the color for domestic violence, victims and survivors. After the jury deliberated, they returned with a guilty verdict on every count. Tammy Malone, Amanda's sister, spoke during the trial's penalty phase, sharing her heartfelt memories of her dear sister Tammy, described Amanda as smart, funny, kind, and compassionate. She let the court know that Amanda's life mattered to many people in many different ways. Linda's husband, Chris Dobbins, also testified. During the sentencing hearing, he spoke about how he left an empty blue chair for Linda at his son's sports games. The blue chair symbolized the void left in their family's life. The courtroom was somber as Chris recounted his memories of his wife, his voice filled with pain and grief. He described the impact Linda had on their family. It was obvious that the loss of these two women had left an unforgettable mark on the lives of their families and friends during the penalty phase. James's defense attorney attempted to argue that James was under the influence of Ambien. At the time of the killings, the defense argued that this impairment prevented him from effectively dealing with the situation. To support this claim, the defense presented evidence suggesting that when James arrived at the court for his injunction violation hearing, he was already impaired. They argued that his confused behavior and mannerisms were indicative of his drug-induced state. However, in rebuttal, the prosecution played CCTV footage from that morning, which depicted James's behavior during his court appearance. The video showed James acting perfectly normal without any signs of intoxication or impairment. Furthermore, the judge who had spoken directly to James that morning also took the stand during the sentencing. Hearing, the judge stated that during their interaction, he did not notice any signs of intoxication. Rather, James appeared lucid and composed. This testimony further undermined the defense's argument that James was impaired at the time of the killings. James's sister Crystal took the stand to testify on his behalf. Crystal painted a different picture of her brother, depicting him as a loving and caring father. She presented pictures of James spending time with his children during happier times, emphasizing the joy and warmth they experienced together. The defensive strategy was clear: to humanize James and remind the jury of the importance of family. By emphasizing his role as a loving father, they hoped to create a softer image and reduce the severity of his crimes. During the defense's closing arguments, the attorneys argued that if jurors were to sentence James to life without parole, he would still face the same fate as the death penalty, as life in prison would mean he would never be released. Florida law requires that 12 jurors unanimously agree on the death penalty in order for it to be applied. Even if one juror holds out, the sentence cannot be imposed. However, based on the information uncovered during the trial, the jurors determined that James deserved the ultimate punishment. They suggested that he should be sentenced to death for his heinous crimes. The judge ultimately agreed with the jury. Amanda's family and Linda's loved ones cried with relief and sadness. While justice had been served, there was still a profound sense of loss on one side of the courtroom. James supporters sat stunned as the bailiff's LED James away, he smiled and winked at his supporters. The story of Amanda and Lindy's murder serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence. Amanda's loved ones hope her story serves as a cautionary tale inspiring others in similar situations to protect themselves. Despite Amanda's efforts to seek justice through the courts, James still managed to reach Amanda's family and friends. Hope that her story serves as a stark reminder of the severity of domestic violence, urging people to take the issue seriously and not dismiss it as mere arguments or misunderstandings. Any act of aggression within a relationship, regardless of how long a couple has been together, is deserving of attention and intervention. The violence can escalate rapidly, leaving good people like Amanda and Lindy dead. Domestic violence does not discriminate, affecting individuals from all walks of life. It does not solely manifest in young couples or those experiencing rocky relationships. Even couples who have been together for decades are not immune to the destructive power of abuse. Through Amanda's story, we are encouraged to break the silence surrounding domestic violence and seek help when needed. By raising awareness and advocating for change, we can prevent future tragedies and ensure that no person has to experience the pain and loss of losing a loved one to domestic violence. Story 5. Robert Leeman, known to his loved ones as Rob, was a man with a heart of gold. From the outside, his large stature and tattoo of his last name on the back of his head might appear intimidating, but those close to knew that he was a gentle giant, a big teddy bear with a kind soul. When Robert and his wife Sabrina first met, they instantly connected. Sabrina, a sweet and loving person, instantly resonated with Robert's character. Despite their differences, they formed a deep bond and fell in love. Faith was deeply important to them, and they attended Mass together. Every Sunday in 2000, Robert and Sabrina were baptized in the same church, solidifying their commitment to each other. They later exchanged vows in a beautiful ceremony in Arizona, surrounded by their family and friends. Over the years, the couple had 2 children, dedicating their lives to raising a loving and stable family. Actually, Robert and Sabrina decided it was time for a change and relocated to Silver Lakes, California, a picturesque town located 99 miles from Los Angeles. Silver Lakes was a peaceful family community that offered a perfect setting to raise their young family. Sabrina stayed home and cared for the house and children, while Robert worked at BNSF Railway, a job he loved. Robert's job at the rail yards was both his passion and a source of pride. He genuinely loved what he did and excelled in his role. His superiors admired him for his reliability and his unwavering work ethic. The rail yards were a bustling and chaotic environment. Despite Robert's dedication, the work was not without danger. The area was frequented by thieves who would patrol. The rail yards looking for cargo to steal these individuals posed a significant threat to the safety of the employees. However, Robert never let these security concerns deter him from his job and remained vigilant with Robert's size and smarts. He could easily take down any opponent, human or animal. Robert was more than just a man. He was a force of nature. Robert's personal life was as vibrant and dynamic as his personality. He and his wife Sabrina, 2 peas in a pod, had an active social life and loved nothing more than throwing parties and hosting gatherings at their home in Silver Lakes. They were known for their warm and welcoming personality, attracting people from all walks of life into their circle of friends. But what captivated everyone about Robert and Sabrina was their youthful energy and unbreakable bond. Robert and Sabrina were like a couple of teenagers in love, not a long-time married couple. They had adorable names for one another and were always laughing, leaving those around them feeling uplifted and inspired. Robert's attentiveness and dedication to Sabrina left many of her girlfriends envious. They wished their husbands were as attentive and considerate as Robert. He seemed to know exactly what Sabrina needed and would always support her, making her feel valued and loved. Even though Robert and Sabrina's social circle was large, at the core of their friendship was a group of tight-knit men and women who referred to themselves as the Wolf Pack. This Wolf Pack included Jason Bertine, a firefighter in Silver Lakes, and his wife Kelly, a hairdresser. As the years went by, Robert and Sabrina became the goat of people for these parties. Creating a fun atmosphere filled with laughter and good times. Alcohol played a significant role in the lives of Robert and Sabrina. They embrace the mantra. It's 5 o'clock somewhere as their go-to phase, whenever the urge to drink struck the heavy drinking, accompanied a changing dynamic in their marriage due to the changes in their relationship. The couple decided to embark on an open arrangement, allowing each other to explore relationships with other people. One of the couples they frequently socialized with was their friend Jason and Kelly. Despite the unconventional nature of their arrangement, Robert and Sabrina seemed happier than ever. They presented the image of an ideal modern American family on Sunday, August 17, 2017. Robert embarked on his usual 85-mile journey to work at the BNSF Railways in Tehachapi. Robert, covering for a co-worker, had a scheduled shift at the BNSF warehouse, a mundane industrial building on the outskirts of the city as the Sidai. Night progressed. Sabrina awaited Robert's return this night. Held a special significance for the couple as their daughter's first day of school. Was the following day the couple's daughter did not want to go to bed without getting a kiss goodnight from her daddy. However, Sabrina's concern grew when Robert never returned home. Meanwhile, in Tehachapi at the BNSF warehouse, Robert's replacement for the night arrived to find Robert lying lifeless on the floor. The co-worker, in shock, immediately called 911, alerting the authorities to the situation. Officers and paramedics arrived at the scene within minutes, but their efforts proved to be in vain. Despite their best efforts, the medics were unable to save Robert. Robert was found sitting against his work truck upon examination. The detectives saw that Robert had been shot twice, once in the upper torso and once in the head. The crime scene investigators immediately secured and processed the crime scene, a small warehouse belonging to the BNSF, as investigators meticulously examined the premises. They stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence, an expended bullet found above Robert's head. This bullet was collected for evidence testing as investigators sought to piece together the puzzle of this heinous crime. As investigators delved deeper into the crime scene, they walked into the warehouse office and noticed it had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, their contents strewn across the floor. Shop manuals, binders, and important documents lay scattered about, seemingly tossed aside in a haphazard manner. Initially, the detectives at the scene believed that the killing of Robert was a crime of opportunity. A suspect looking to perpetrate a robbery had stumbled upon the unsuspecting victim and opened fire, leaving him lifeless on the ground. However, as the investigation progressed, the detectives began to question their initial assumptions. Upon closer examination, the detectives realized the crime scene had been staged. News of Robert's murder reached Sabrina, Robert's wife. The devastating new news shattered her world, leaving her in a state of shock and grief. Sabrina retreated to her room, shut off from the outside world, and wanted no part in planning his funeral. During the investigation into Robert's murder, the detectives faced a peculiar challenge. Everyone who knew Robert described him as an exceptional person. Robert's friends and family painted a picture of a man who had it all: charm, intelligence, and charisma. According to them, he was the type of man every woman wanted this overwhelming praise for. Robert confused the detectives. If Robert was such a great man, why would someone want to shoot him in cold blood? The detectives were left scratching their heads, unable to find any logical motive behind such a heinous crime. As the investigation progressed, the detectives found themselves at a standstill. There were no witnesses to the shooting and no evidence at the scene that could lead them to a suspect. The only person they were left with to question was Robert's wife, Sabrina. Sabrina assured the investigators that she and her husband had an excellent relationship. She expressed her shock at the realization that someone would want to harm Robert. Although the crime scene yielded a bullet fragment, it provided no evidentiary value. However, the detectives were able to determine that the bullet had come from a .044 or .0045 Magnum weapon. Despite the lack of solid leads, the detectives remained determined to uncover the truth behind Robert's murder. Their determination was fueled by the desire to bring justice to a man who, by all accounts, deserved nothing better but the best in his life. In an effort to piece together the puzzle, the detectives received the security camera footage from the warehouse where Robert worked. However, to their dismay, the camera fitted inside his work truck was not running. At the time of the incident, rendering it useless. The only camera that captured any footage was outside the warehouse. As the detectives watched the footage, they spotted a person with a limp walking through the warehouse complex around the time they believed Rob was shot. Unfortunately, the grainy quality of the video made it difficult to identify any features of this person. However, the detectives felt confident that it was a man, not a woman. Based on the shape of the person's body, Robert's employer, BNSF Railway, stepped in to help in the search for answers. They offered a $1,000 reward for any information that could lead to an arrest. This incentive generated a flood of leads from various tipsters, but unfortunately none were relevant to Robert's shooting. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they discovered additional video footage of Robert. On the day he was killed, this footage was obtained from local businesses located along Goodrich Drive near the warehouse where Robert was shot. The detectives carefully reviewed the footage they were able to identify and track. Every motorist who passed by the area during that time. However, there was one notable exception. Despite their best efforts, the detectives were unable to identify the person driving a motorcycle who passed by the area. Around the time Robert was murdered, this mysterious motorcycle driver stood out to the detectives. They felt strongly that the person was connected to the crime but could not identify them due to a helmet obscuring their face. The identity of the motorcyclist remained a mystery, adding to the frustrations of the investigation. Despite their extensive efforts, the detectives were unable to determine who the person was, as the detectives worked tirelessly to unravel the truth behind the crime. They received an unexpected lead from Robert's friend Jason Bertine 3 weeks after Robert's murder. Jason came forward with important information that could shed light on the case. He contacted the detective working on Robert's murder investigation and divulged details about a man named Jonathan Hearn. According to Jason, Jonathan was a firefighter and used to work with him. Jason revealed suspicions about Jonathan's relationship with Robert's wife, Sabrina Leeman. He informed the detective that Jonathan had called him and left a voicemail expressing remorse for Robert's passing. However, the content of the message was confounding. Jonathan never explicitly admitted involvement in the murder, but expressed apologies for what had happened. Jason turned over more evidence to the police regarding Jonathan Hearn. This evidence was a letter written by Jonathan in which he repeatedly apologized for something. However, the letter failed to provide insight into what exactly Jonathan was apologizing for. Furthermore, Jason's wife, Kelly, shared her suspicions with the detectives. According to her, Jonathan had been spending a significant amount of time at Sabrina and Robert's home following Robert's murder. Kelly found this strange. The detectives began their investigation by looking into Jonathan Hearn's background. They discovered that in 2012, Sabrina, the victim's girlfriend, worked part-time at Costco. Coincidentally, Jonathan was a frequent shopper at this store. Sabrina and Jonathan struck up a conversation and a connection was formed. After exchanging phone numbers, they soon found themselves in a romantic relationship. However, Robert, unaware of the ongoing affair, stumbled upon intimate text messages on Sabrina's phone. This discovery shattered his trust in her. Sabrina assured Robert that she would end things with Jonathan, but that promise proved empty. As the detectives explored various leads, they discovered that Jonathan Hearn had access to a motorcycle. This discovery raised suspicions as the detectives believed that the suspect had used a motorcycle to carry out Robert's murder. Further investigation revealed that there was a Yamaha motorcycle registered to Jonathan. That information added fuel to the detectives' theory that Jonathan Hearn may have been involved in the murder. The evidence of the motorcycle and that Jonathan had been involved in a romantic relationship with Sabrina behind Robert's back made him a plausible suspect in a desperate attempt to gather more footage of the suspect. The detectives focused on pulling CCTV footage from businesses in the area. Their efforts paid off when they stumbled upon footage of the motorcycle driver pulling into a nearby Pilot gas station. The detectives found more footage of the suspect in the convenience store, where they were able to see the suspect wearing a red bandana to conceal his face. However, with the helmet still on, they were unable to identify the suspect's features. Despite their suspicions, the detectives found themselves in a predicament without concrete evidence linking the motorcycle driver to Jonathan Hearn. They could not make an arrest. The lack of visual identification left the investigation at a standstill. However, the detectives remained convinced that Sabrina was involved in the murder. They knew that if their theory was correct, Sabrina's lover Jonathan was likely the culprit, determined to catch them in the act. The detectives placed a wiretap on Sabrina's phone. Their hope was to intercept any incriminating conversations between Sabrina and Jonathan, providing the evidence they needed to bring justice to Robert's murder. So Sabrina and Jonathan spoke often, and their conversations were mainly centered around God and religion. However, there were moments when Jonathan delved deeper into his beliefs, reciting Psalm 51, also known as the Tale of David of Betha. This psalm, which delves into the consequences of adultery, caught the detectives' attention as they wondered whether their discussion had a deeper meaning. Determined to get Sabrina and Jonathan to open up, the detectives devised an ingenious plan they called Sabrina and Lied, telling her that the detectives had found DNA evidence at the scene linking the suspects to Robert's murder. This ploy was designed to provoke a reaction from Sabrina and Jonathan, hoping it would prompt them to discuss their involvement in the crime. As soon as the detective hung up the phone with Sabrina, they immediately listened in on the wiretap. Sabrina wasted no time in calling her lover Jonathan during the call. Sabrina and Jonathan never explicitly admitted to killing Robert. However, the detectives felt the conversation was telling. Neither of them seemed thrilled at the news of the DNA evidence, leading them to believe that they were hiding something. On November 18, 2014, detectives were granted search warrants for multiple locations related to Robert's murder. These searches were crucial in gathering evidence and piecing together the puzzle at one of the search locations. The home of Jonathan, detectives stumbled upon a Yamaha motorcycle, a helmet, a red bandana, a backpack, and other items. That same day, the detectives arrested Jonathan and Sabrina following the arrests of Sabrina and Jonathan. Sabrina was taken to the police department for questioning during this 4-hour interview. Sabrina adamantly denied having any involvement in her husband's murder. She maintained her innocence and refused to implicate herself in any way. Despite the efforts of the detectives, no evidence could be found to connect Sabrina to the shooting. As a result, the detectives were left with no choice other than to release her, on returning to Silver Lakes. Sabrina was met with an unexpected backlash from her neighbors. The community that once loved her and her husband's infamous parties now turned against her. Sabrina was subjected to harassment and threats, forcing her to pull her children out of school. The pressure became unbearable, and Sabrina made the decision to leave Silver Lakes behind. Seeking a fresh start, Sabrina relocated to Camaro, California on January 7, 2017. Sabrina was arrested for Robert's murder. The charges against her this time stuck, and the case finally went to trial. Jonathan emerged as the star witness for the prosecution. He testified that Sabrina had suggested divorcing Robert so that she could be with him. However, Robert made it clear that he loved her too much and would rather die than lose her. According to Jonathan, Sabrina then had the idea to plan and execute her husband's murder. According to Jonathan, the first time they attempted to murder Robert, Sabrina mixed arsenic into his banana pudding with vanilla wafers. However, the attempt was unsuccessful and Robert survived undeterred. Sabrina and Jonathan planned a second attack. She showed him images of the warehouse and the surrounding area, describing the layout. In great detail, Jonathan claimed Sabrina wanted him to know what to expect when he entered the warehouse to shoot Robert. On August 17, 2017, Jonathan confessed to the jury that he made a trip to the following Sabrina's instructions. He arrived and confirmed the CCTV footage that showed a man with a limp entering. However, Jonathan admitted that he had faked the limp to throw off the police, hoping to divert attention away from himself. Once inside the warehouse, Jonathan confronted Robert. He admitted to shooting Robert. Following Sabrina's instructions to make the scene look like a robbery, Jonathan stated that he went into the office and made a mess before leaving the warehouse. Jonathan said he realized Robert was not dead. He was still breathing. Jonathan admitted he shot Robert a second time, this time in the head, after committing the murder. Jonathan fled the scene on his motorcycle, feeling a mixture of belief and guilt. He quickly made his way back home. Upon his return, Jonathan discovered that he had received numerous missed calls from Sabrina. Jonathan immediately called Sabrina back and confessed that he had carried out the murder. As the trial progressed, The prosecution called Sabrina Lemon to the stand. Sabrina was the key witness for the defense, and her statements left the courtroom buzzing with speculation. During her testimony, Sabrina said that she and Robert were on good terms at the time of his death, but she also testified that she had feelings for Jonathan Hearn. Sabrina admitted to having a romantic relationship with Jonathan, but insisted that she never planned on leaving Robert. She claimed that she and Jonathan were merely exploring their options and exploring a future together while still committed to their respective marriages. However, the prosecution argued that Sabrina's actions did not all line with her claims. One of the key aspects of the prosecution's case was the belief that Sabrina may have murdered Robert for financial gain. They argued that Robert's life insurance money could provide the perfect motive. However, Sabrina denied the allegations, stating that any funds she received were placed in a savings account for their children's living expenses. She claimed that never intended to use the money for her own gain. Sabrina insisted that she had no prior knowledge or involvement. In his death, however, the prosecution presented evidence to the jury that showed Sabrina did not act like a grieving widow. After the shooting, they presented text messages that Sabrina and Jonathan exchanged, revealing their continued romantic relationship in one text. Sabrina calls Jonathan a sexy guy and professes her love for him. Sabrina even wrote that she had a desire to kiss Jonathan all over nonstop after a lengthy trial. Sabrina Lemon was found guilty of 4 of the 6 counts against her, including first-degree murder, attempted murder solicitation, and conspiracy to commit murder. Sabrina was acquitted of the charge of alleged poisoning. The guilty verdict brought a sense of relief to Robert's family and friends who had eagerly awaited justice. However, the acquittal on the poisoning charge left some unanswered questions and speculation. In November 2017, Jonathan Hearn was sentenced to the terms of his plea deal. He pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter and was given his 25-year, 4-month sentence. During the sentencing hearing, Jonathan expressed remorse and apologized to Robert's family and friends. Despite his involvement, he seemed to genuinely regret his actions and the impact they had on the lives of those involved. The judge sentenced Sabrina to 25 to life, plus an additional 16 months. Despite her convictions, Sabrina showed no remorse and filed an appeal with a new attorney. In Sabrina's appeal, she argued that her attorney should never have allowed her to testify. She claimed that her attorney's decision had compromised her defense and ultimately led to her conviction. Sabrina claimed that her attorney had failed to adequately prepare for the trial and failed to protect her interests. Sabrina's appeal went through the state courts, but ultimately her conviction was upheld, frustrated. Sabrina decided to take her case to federal court. The case received significant attention, with legal experts and media outlets speculating about the possibility of her acquittal. However, in January 2023, Sabrina's case was again upheld in federal court. This ruling was a blow to Sabrina's hopes. Story 6 on the evening of December 25, 2009 in Manhattan, New York. Shelley Denise had just got done celebrating Christmas with her 2 kids the next couple of days. Shelley prepared to celebrate New Year's Eve with her family, but things took a sad turn when she was found dead in her bathtub at Dorchester Towers apartment building on the 31st of December 2009. The initial investigation found an accident to be the cause of Shelley's death, and the case was closed. However, a few facts about this apparent accident didn't sit well with some investigators, who decided to get to the bottom of why a young, ambitious woman was found dead in her home. A decade later, it would be discovered that Shelley didn't die by accidental death, but was murdered by someone who once claimed to love her. This is the case of Rod Coughlin, who got blinded by his greed and went to extreme lengths to access his wife's money. In 1998, 34-year-old Shelley Denise was living in New York and pursuing her career in financial advising. Shell had a kind personality that was difficult to ignore and had the ability to instantly catch people's attention with her graceful aura. Another fact about Shell was that she was extremely ambitious too. She had studied marketing in college and started working in New York's financial sector. Soon after graduation, her hard work and commitment to her profession eventually helped her become a successful financial advisor in New York who had many high-profile clients. Everyone who worked with her or had her as their financial advisor knew Shelley as someone who knew how to get things done quickly while Shell was doing extremely well professionally for a woman of her age. Her personal life was a completely different story. Despite being in the second half of her 30s, Shell still hadn't found a life partner yet. Shell had achieved a lot in her professional life and knew it was time to focus on her personal life and start a family with someone who understood her, her ambition and her values. Shell was actively looking for a life partner, and fate finally found her. One in February 1998, she attended a Jewish singles party in a bar called Larbat, located in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of Manhattan. It was an event organized for people of the same faith as her, so the occasion couldn't be more suitable to end her long wait and find a life partner during the event. Shell met a 25-year-old man named Roder Sind, and it was love at first sight. In fact, it was more than that, because just a few hours after meeting Rod, Shelley called her sister Eve and told her that she was on her way to Las Vegas to get married to Rod, although her sister convinced her at the time not to rush such an important decision in her life that didn't end the special connection between Shelley and Rod Shelley. And Rod had an 11-year age difference, but it didn't bother either of them, and a few weeks after the singles party, the couple got engaged. Both Rod and Ann Shell had told their families about their partner and how amazing their bond was. 7 months after meeting each other for the first time in September 1998, Rod Coven and Shelley Denise got married in a happy ceremony that was attended by their friends and family. In 2000, 2 years after getting married, the couple welcomed their first child, a girl whom they named Anna. During the early years of marriage, the bond between Rod and Shelley grew stronger, and they became inseparable. Since both of them were Jewish and Shell had been brought up in an Orthodox Jewish family, it made the couple very active in their local Jewish community. Things went well for the first few years, but after that, differences started to arise, and both Rod and Shelley realized they didn't have as many things in common as they thought when they met and married in 1998. Shelley, being a hardworking woman, kept climbing the career ladder and became senior vice president for private wealth management at UBS. As for Roddick, he was completely opposite to his wife. He had initially tried to make a career as a stockbroker, but when he couldn't succeed, he decided to live off his wife's money. Shelley wanted her husband to be successful like her and even funded a couple of his ventures, but due to Rod's lack of interest, both the businesses failed. Having a husband who couldn't become as successful as her was still acceptable to Sheila because she loved him. But things started to change when Rod developed an obsessive passion for backgammon gambling. Rod won a few games initially and decided to earn money through it. He would go on days-long trips around the country to participate in different B-gam tournaments when home. He would spend hours playing the game to get better at it. But that wasn't the only problem with time. Rod had also secretly started looking for women to date on different websites and social media platforms. He was so into it that he once contacted nearly 40 women on Facebook in a single day, most of which were the B-gammon players he had met during different tournaments. At this point, B-gam mattered more to Rod than anything and anyone, including his wife and daughter, to make things worse for Sheila. He had also started having sudden anger outbursts, which made his wife believe that he was bipolar. Sheila's bad time wasn't ending as she got pregnant with twins and lost both of them in a premature delivery. One baby died in the womb, and the other died shortly after birth. The doctors told Sheila that she wouldn't be able to conceive again, but the couple wanted another child. So in 2006, Rod and Sheila resorted to an egg donor and welcomed a baby boy named Miles to the family. Rod had slowly become so toxic that he frequently reminded Sheila that because of her, they had to use an egg donor to get their son. But he didn't stop there and later even told their son that Sheila wasn't his biological mother in 2008. Exactly 10 years after they had met and married each other, Rod and Sheila's marriage was damaged. Beyond repair, things had gotten messed up to the point that Rod even asked his wife for an open marriage, which made an Orthodox Jew like Sheila disgusted, and she immediately rejected her husband's idea. But this didn't stop Rod from his streak of infidelity, and he joined J-Date, a Jewish dating website, under a fake name, James Early. Rod had become so toxic that he didn't even hide his affairs from his wife. By January 2009, Sheila was completely fed up with Rod, his anger issues, and his infidelity. She even told her sister Eve that she was scared this could lead to something bad for her and her children. In April 2009, Sheila decided to live separately to avoid issues with her husband from affecting her children. But Sheila didn't want the children to be separated from their father, so she leased an apartment across the hall in the same building and asked Rod to move in there. The couple tried to make the new arrangement work, but soon things got worse within a month when Rod forcefully moved his stuff back into Sheila's apartment by mid-May 2009. Sheila knew her marriage couldn't be saved and filed for divorce. This forced Rod to move back to the apartment across the hall, and things slowly started getting back to normal for the couple. Sheila now put her full focus into work and continued with her successful career. Since she and Rod had officially separated, she also started seeing other guys. She was once again a happy woman who was thriving in her personal and professional life. Sheila's progress didn't sit well with her ex-partner, who decided to make her life the living hell at. It was in the later years of their marriage he put up spy cameras in the hallway and even installed spyware on her computer to monitor all her online activities. But he didn't stop there and tried to get Sheila fired by falsely complaining to her boss that she was using drugs and was also draining their joint account, when in reality Sheila used only $800 from the account compared to Rod, who had withdrawn $7,200. Since their separation, Rod's attempt to get Sheila fired from her job failed because her boss was already aware of the situation. Infuriated by this, Rod Coughlin decided to become even more evil, having unrestricted access to Sheila's apartment. Rod took the kids from their mother's apartment on July 8, 2009, and didn't come back at 8 p.m. when he was supposed to return. The children, Sheila tried contacting him, but he didn't respond to her calls or messages. Worried about her children's safety, Sheila decided to contact the police. On the other hand, Rod hadn't taken the kids sightseeing or to a theme park, but rather took them to a Columbia Presbyterian hospital to report Sheila for sexual abuse. However, the doctors and the Administration for Child Services quickly saw through Rod's lies, and the kids were returned to Sheila around 5:30 a.m. the next morning. But this didn't stop Rod from claiming his false story was true. He filed a complaint about Sheila's made-up abuse in the NYPD's Special Victims Unit, but like the doctors and the AC's agents at the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, detectives in the special unit also concluded that Rod was lying and the case was closed. This move ALS also backfired, and the family court judge who was hearing Rod in Sheila's divorce case limited his visitation privileges and allowed him to see his children only under a court's official supervision. The court also ordered Rod to pay $425 in child support to Sheila, and when he said he didn't have the money, he was forbidden to spend money on backgammon and gambling, which infuriated him even more. The anger soon turned into physical abuse when Rod choked Sheila and threatened her that he would kill her, scared for her and her children's lives. Sheila immediately got a protection order from the court. Up until this point, Rod was still a part of Sheila's will. But on December 29, 2009, Sheila decided to fully and permanently cut her ex-husband from her life and asked her estate attorney to remove Rod's name from her will on the 30th of December 2009. Sheila left the children with a babysitter and went on a date with someone she had recently met on J-Date. When she returned from her date, she played with the kids for a while before putting them to bed at 10:13 p.m. Sheila logged into her J-Date profile and logged out after a few minutes on the 31st of December, the day when Sheila was to meet her estate attorney and put her husband's matter to rest forever. Her 9-year-old daughter Anna woke up at 7 a.m. and went to her mother's room to wake her up. However, Anna didn't find Sheila in her room. She then went into the bathroom, and as soon as she opened the door, she screamed. Sheila was lying face down in a pool of blood. Anna immediately called her father, Rod, who came running into their apartment. Rod removed Sheila from the tub, called 911, and performed CPR on her motionless body when the police reached Sheila's apartment. First responders were already there and informed the officers that the deceased was in the rear bathroom of the apartment. Soon the investigators also arrived at the scene. Rod told them that he believed Sheila accidentally slipped and hit her head on the bathtub while taking an early morning shower. He even showed the investigators a cabinet above the bathtub with its hinges partially pulled off. The investigators also thought that it was nothing more than an unfortunate accidental death. Anna, who found Sheila's dead body, and Rod, who was the first adult to come into contact with her body, were asked a few more questions before the officers concluded the investigation and informed Sheila's family of her death. After returning to his office, one of the detectives, Rodermel, went over the details of the crime scene. While the evidence pointed to Sheila's death being an accident, Rodermel believed something was off because a lot of things he saw that morning didn't make sense. For example, the position of the body and the angle of the cabinet door that was pulled off didn't match the slip and a foul story that Rod Coughlin had told him. Another thing that Rodermel noticed was that the victim had bruises and red scratch marks on her face, lips, and right arm, which was unusual for a person who had just gone to the bathroom for a shower. The detective then tracked Sheila's activities from the previous night, and one particular detail made him even more curious about the cause of her death. The day before her death, Sheila had received a keratin treatment and was told to not wash her hair for the next 72 hours. It raised a question: why would Sheila decide to take a bath when she wasn't supposed to wash her hair for the next 3 days? Rod had also told the investigating officer that he had pulled Sheila's body out of the blood-stained water, but his shirt was without any stain. When he was sharing details of the incident, the detective Rodermel didn't do a full forensic search of the crime scene because he wanted to wait for Sheila's autopsy to be released first. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because Sheila Danny's ultra-Orthodox Jewish family was against it because of their religious beliefs. After this, Detective Rodermel couldn't do much in his investigation, and the case was officially closed. The news of Sheila's death had shocked everyone close to her. However, like Detective Rodermel, some of Sheila's family and friends were also suspicious about the cause of her death. Eve, her sister, revealed that Sheila didn't like taking baths and always preferred taking showers. One of Sheila's friends, Stephanie Goldman, also agreed with Eve's statement and had said that Sheila never even took a short bath. Even after her burial, many members of Sheila Danny's family suspected that she was a victim of cold-blooded murder by her ex-husband, Rod Coughlin. The suspicion soon turned into a firm belief when Sheila's estate attorney, Lance Meyer, informed the family that Sheila was scheduled to meet him on the day of her death to remove her ex-husband from her will. The reason for an increasing number of fingers pointing at Rod Coughlin was simple. He stood to get $5.2 million in the event of her death. While he was still in her will, in light of these new shocking details, Sheila's family approached the authorities and requested them to reopen the case and continue with their investigation. Detective Rodermel and Detective Francis Brennan, the two lead investigators in the case, informed the family they couldn't investigate Sheila's death further because the case was officially closed. The detectives also told the Danis that the only way to reopen the case was if they allowed an autopsy of the victim's body. However, that was out of the question because of their religious beliefs. When the police refused to help them without an autopsy, the family took matters into their own hands and hired a private investigator, Michael Swain, to get to the bottom of Sheila's death and Rod Kinn's role in it. When Michael Swain visited Sheila's apartment, he noticed that the screws of the cabinet hinges had been pulled out by design, and someone like Sheila, who had a lean build, couldn't rip off the hinges. Even while falling, he also noticed that there was no bath towel in the bathroom, which was quite unusual, because according to Rod, Sheila had gone to the bathroom to take a bath 2 months after Sheila's death. Her family agreed for her autopsy to be carried out on the 1st of March 2010. The authorities got the order of exhumation from the court, and Sheila Danny's body was sent for an autopsy. When the autopsy report came back, it was found that Sheila's hyoid had been fractured, which was a common sign of strangulation in light of the new revelations in April 2010. Sheila's cause of death was changed from accident to homicide. However, the investigation team had to wait for 2 more months to get a search warrant for her apartment when it came to interviewing the people who had seen or interacted with the victim during her last few hours. Melissa Fields, Sheila's friend, was the first person to be interviewed. Melissa told the investigators that she had met Sheila a few hours before her death and sensed something was wrong upon asking her friend about it. Sheila told her she felt her ex-husband was following her. When Sheila Danny's ex-husband, Roderick Sins, turned for an interview came, he refused to cooperate with the authorities. Upon checking his emails and phone records from the 30th of December 2009, it was found that he was in contact with a woman named D.O. from North Carolina, married with 3 children. Deborah was a backgammon player. Rod had met during a tournament. They both had started an extramarital affair, and Deborah had even visited Rod in New York on the night of Sheila's murder. Rod and Deborah played backgammon until 1:03 a.m. before Rod left to do some work on his backgammon federation at 4 a.m. Rod sent Deborah a text and told her he didn't do any work because he had fallen asleep. The apartment building's CCTV cameras showed Rod going out of the building at 4:13 a.m. He came back a few minutes later and gave the doorman a Snickers bar, which was very out of character for someone who was normally antisocial. Sheila's time of death had been estimated to be between 1:25 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., and that was the exact time window when Rod wasn't in contact with Deborah. When Deborah was interviewed, she only had good things to say about Rod and didn't give anything that could lead to charging Rod with Sheila's murder. Rod, due to the ongoing investigation and murder case filed against him in 2011, was barred from accessing the money Sheila had left him in her will, and his children were placed with his parents because of Rod's custody battle with their maternal uncle. Soon his parents found out that Rod had been stealing from the children's college fund, which resulted in violent arguments. Rod took a total of $84,000 from the children's college fund and spent it on trips with Deborah and participating in different backgammon tournaments due to his increasingly violent behavior. Rod's parents banished him and Deborah from their house. Infuriated, he decided to kill his parents and get his children and Sheila's money back. He came up with a number of different murder plans. Initially, he thought of poisoning them by getting Anna and his daughter to mix the poison in their tea, but he soon dropped this plan and decided to sneak into the house through the basement window, kill both his parents, get his children, and set the house on fire. A couple of his plans also included Deborah, whom he had shared everything with, but she refused to become part of any such plan and asked Rod to drop those ideas too, while Rod was busy trying to find a foolproof plan to get rid of his parents. The police were looking at different aspects of the case to find credible evidence against him. When Rod realized he might be close to getting arrested, he tried to frame his daughter Anna for Sheila's murder. He drafted a false confession in Anna's email account in which she had said she pushed her mother in the bathroom, which resulted in her death. According to the fake email on the night of Sheila's death, Anna had an argument with her because of her going on dates. By 2014, Deborah had also become terrified of Rod, and the pair started growing distance. Rod eventually broke up with Deborah, which turned out to be a huge mistake, because Deborah soon contacted the authorities and told everything she knew about Rod and her plans. Over the years, the police now had enough evidence against him, so Rod Coven was arrested on November 1st. 2015, the arrest was made just months before the end of the 6-year wait imposed on him by the court, which would give him access to Shell's $5.2 million. Besides her statements, Deborah also provided hard drives full of data from Rod's electronic devices that indicated that Rod killed his wife to gain custody of the children. As a result, Rod Coughlin was charged with second-degree murder in 2016, and his trial began in 2019. A 12-member jury heard testimonies at the Manhattan Supreme Court in New York. The prosecutors argued that Rod always wanted to get rid of Shelley. It was just a matter of when the prosecutors also argued that despite all the evidence against Rod Coven being circumstantial, he was the only person who had motive to kill Shelley Denise. Patricia Swenson, one of the key witnesses and Rod's former girlfriend, told the court that during a trip in August 2009, Rod got extremely angry when talking about his ex-wife. She also said that he repeatedly said during that trip he wanted to kill Shelley as the trial progressed more and more. Damning evidence against Rod was presented in front of the court, despite his lawyer attempts to portray him as innocent. The conclusion of the 8-week-long trial saw the jury finding Rod Coven guilty of murdering his ex-wife Sheila Denise on April 10, 2019. The court sentenced Roderick Coven to 25 years to life imprisonment for murdering his ex-wife. Rod Coven later appealed the court's decision, but the appeal was rejected. He is currently serving his time in Attica Correctional Facility in New York as the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper. Thank you for joining me here at Mr. Sherlock Holmes. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware, even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. If you've enjoyed tonight's tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the Night Watch watch over you.